Hello and welcome to episode 3 of the Movies for Breakfast podcast. Who knew we'd make it to 3 episodes? Not me, but I guess me because I made it happen. So today we're eating Sorry Baby for breakfast. I'm not going to retell the whole plot just out of respect for this movie because I really do think that everyone should go see it who can go see it. I think the way that the story is told is just as important as what the story is. So there's no secondary source or content that is going to replace the movie. And I definitely don't want anyone to use my content as a way to substitute seeing the movie. That being said, because the story is very character driven rather than plot driven, I am still going to give enough context for my analysis that you can enjoy listening to this episode whether or not you've seen the movie. It doesn't really rely on any sort of plot twists, in my opinion. I knew the main event that happens going in, and I don't feel that it ruined anything for me. If you really don't want to know a thing about this movie before you go in, I'll give a spoiler warning when I get into spoilers. But as usual, I'm going to start with a spoiler-free rating and review, give you my overall thoughts. Okay, so when I left the theater after seeing Sorry Baby, I was thinking of giving it 4.5 out of 5 stars, but honestly, the more I thought about it, the more I really could hardly fault it for anything, and I think it just needed to marinate a little bit longer in my brain. So I did give it 5 out of 5 stars, which is fairly rare for me. It was moving, it was beautiful, it explored very intense and painful things without being indulgent, without glamorizing any of it, and I deeply connected to the story and the characters. This is Eva Victor's film debut. I'm not sure if it's Eva or Ava. This was Ava Victor's debut as a director, and she also starred in it. And I think for a debut, this is insane. A24 tends to give us more creative filmmaking, but not always, and not necessarily always to good result. But I think that Ava absolutely killed this. We saw such interesting filmmaking. There's so much for me to break down and get into. I definitely cannot break down all of it in one episode. But I think it was fantastic. And I watched it on July 20, and I'm recording this on July 28. So it's been 8 days since I watched it. It feels like longer. I've really been sitting on it and just thinking about it. And the more I think about it, the more I'm like, yeah, that was incredible. I almost felt mesmerized watching it. It was a Sunday. I was by myself. And when I left the theater and it was broad daylight still, I felt that feeling of would you walk out of the Sunday mass? I felt so disoriented. I walked for 20 minutes to the next theater, if you know, without any music in my headphones or anything. I was just staring into the middle distance, processing what I had just seen. In some ways, it's very simple, but it's just done perfectly right. It's kind of like on Top Chef or something when they say, if you're gonna do a spaghetti bolognese, that's definitely not what they would say, but if you're gonna do it, you better do it perfectly right without a crazy budget or big name stars or anything. It was just good. When I say the filmmaking is good, I specifically mean cinematography, and I'll get into that with spoilers. The acting was incredible, and I'm not a huge, I don't have a great eye for what is good acting because I'm a terrible actor, but I did think that the acting in this was amazing and was a really big part of why we cared so deeply, especially from Ava as Agnes. I thought the score was perfect, suited the movie perfectly, costume, truly so many details were taken care of impeccably. So yeah, go see the movie while it's still out in theaters. Here on out, we are gonna do spoilers. Spoiler warning. This is your spoiler warning. Okay. So like I said, this movie is not very plot focused. This is a character driven story. Hang on, let me get comfortable now that we're getting into it. Like I said, this is not a very plot driven movie. And so I think in order for me to give you what you need to know about what happens to follow along with the analysis I'm going to do, I should primarily give you the cast of characters. Okay, it's a small cast. So our star is Ava Victor as Agnes. So she's directing and she's also in the lead role. Agnes is a recently graduated or somewhat recently graduated grad student at this unnamed Northeast liberal arts college. She lives alone, and we meet her at the start of the movie when her best friend comes to visit her. And her best friend is Lydie, played by Naomi Aki. Lydie is Agnes's best friend from when they were doing their graduate degree together at this university. But since graduation, Lydie has moved away, quite far away it seems like, and they don't get to see each other as often. Lydie is very warm, fun, so they are best friends. It's not really that Agnes is the main character and Lydie is her best friend. It's that there is no Agnes without Lydie. Like, their characters are so intertwined, and you wouldn't really understand who Agnes is if Lydie weren't there, which I think is true in the story and from on the other side of the fourth wall perspective. Then we have Decker. That's his last name. I don't know what his first name is, but that's Professor Decker, played by Louis Cancelmi. And this is the main professor that taught Agnes and Lydie and a couple of other people in their program. It seemed like a small program, probably a PhD, and he was their advisor. We see a few clips of class with just 4 or 5 students, including Agnes and Lydie, and then Professor Decker. He's somewhat young, he's good looking, he's the cool, funny, charming, young hotshot teacher. Okay, those 3 are kind of the main ones I feel I need to tell you right now, and then as we go I might introduce a couple more. And we are set in this small college town. It's cold, the trees are dead, and Agnes is welcoming Lydie for a visit. So I was immediately riveted. They got me. Scene 1, like I said, there is no Agnes without Lydie, and I think the opening of the movie being this reunion of Agnes and Lydie is so cool because it's so true to female friendship. They are so clearly best friends. They are squealing and jumping up and down when they see each other, and it's like all this excitement, and it's really just to go sit on the couch and talk for hours. That is what female friendship is all about. That is what best friendship is all about. It's not that they're talking about anything specific or anything specifically deep. It's just the existing in each other's company that they are so excited to do. And I thought that was really beautiful. And the way that they're talking really unfiltered right off the bat and just cracking each other up, also very real. And I loved it. I love to see it. You can see they both light up in each other's presence. Basically, what we learned from this interaction is that Agnes has been pretty lonely since graduation, since she stayed in this town. And Lydie seemingly has done a better job of sort of moving on and growing, while Agnes has been a bit stuck physically in the town, but then also maybe emotionally stunted. And we get the sense that something bad happened at school that Agnes is haunted by. I'm trying to remember, like, the chronological order of the story is not necessarily super clear to me because it was nonlinear. So I'm going to tell it in the order that makes sense to me. But just keep in mind that the timeline here is not exactly how I'm saying it. All right. While Lydie is in town with Agnes, they go to a dinner party at Natasha's house. Natasha is my sister's name, so this is difficult for me because Natasha sucks in this movie. Clearly, Agnes really doesn't want to go to this dinner. She's like dreading it, but Lydie's like, no, we kind of have to go. Like, let's just do it, you know? We'll go together. It'll be fine. So then we get this really dynamic dinner scene at their former classmate Natasha's house. I feel like the hot topic of the day, everyone wants to talk about media literacy, and often this is used as kind of like a dunk on someone, like, there's no media literacy these days, like, you people are so stupid. And I get it, like, yes yes, that's true, but I also think of media literacy much more broadly as being able to critically consume lots of different forms of media: art, photography, film, literature. And I think making that more accessible to people is part of the problem. As it stands, like, you learn how to read literature, hopefully kind of in school. You learn how to read poetry, you learn what a metaphor is, symbolism. Why can't I think of anything? You learn literary devices, right, in school. And if you decide to read as an adult, you still have that in mind and you understand. Unless you took a film class, I feel that we don't really learn or generally share knowledge about film techniques. And film can be read like literature. You can analyze the way that the director chooses to tell you the story as much as you can analyze the script and what the story is, okay? What I'm getting to with this dinner table scene is that it broke a fundamental rule of film, rule in air quotes, called the 180-degree rule. If you know what this is, yay, happy for you. If not, I will explain. So in the moment, what you feel is that this dinner is incredibly claustrophobic and disorienting and kind of miserable for Agnes. There's Natasha, the host, and she's kind of got these crazy eyes and a really weird competitive vibe that she brings to the function. You can tell that she is kind of jealous in a sick way, almost right off the bat, okay? And then there's two other guys who were in their program together, or at least one of them was in the program and the other one's his partner. So there's like 5-ish people at this table as far as I remember. And as we're cutting back and forth and they're making comments about, oh yeah, the good old days in school, you know, like how's everything been since then? Oh, we're buying furniture. Oh, blah, 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 blah. It comes up that Agnes got a teaching position. I don't know if that's what came up, but whatever. It comes up that Agnes was a star in school, and one of them says something like it's not her fault that she was Decker's favorite. And right away, Agnes's face drops. And this is where I say that Ava's acting was like mind-blowing to me. Personally, her eyes are so expressive. You feel her kind of go like dissociate almost immediately when the topic of Decker comes up. So right off the bat, I'm like, okay, he sexually assaulted her. That is the only explanation for what just happened with the sentence that she was his favorite, and then her reaction being so obviously a trauma response. If these people were more sensitive and aware, they would see how uncomfortable Agnes was and they would drop it. But not the case. Natasha kind of piles on because she's clearly very jealous of that fact that Decker really liked Agnes when they were in college. The content here is negative and awkward, and you can like extrapolate from that Agnes feels uncomfortable. But we also are made to feel uncomfortable by them breaking the 180-degree rule. Okay, and so what the 180-degree rule is, if you have your characters on a set and you're cutting back and forth as they're conversing, you only want the camera to remain on one side of a line that cuts down the middle of them. So if you're at a dinner table, you can only film not all the way around 360, just 180. Okay, if you're listening on audio, hopefully you understand what I mean when I say an imaginary line, but I've basically drawn a hypothetical dinner table for people sitting around it, okay? Now, if the camera were to film from all the way around, from different angles on each person while they talk, you would lose track very, very quickly of who's sitting where and of the orientation of the space. That's confusing for viewers, and most of the time, the director is not trying to confuse the viewers. Introduce the 180-degree rule. So I've drawn an imaginary line across the middle of this dinner table, then that's what I'm talking about as the range of motion that the camera can occupy. And actually this specifically comes up a lot in dinner table scenes because that's one of the most common types of scenes where you have people sitting 360 degrees around each other. Once you're told it, you'll notice in films that a lot of times people are sitting at booths with one side open, or there's kind of a conspicuously unoccupied chair in the table, and that's to allow room for the camera and for it to make sense. At Natasha's house, not only is the lighting dim and almost horror movie-esque on some of these people's faces, we are also very disoriented. I can't tell the positional relationship of these people at the table. I can't tell who's sitting across from whom. And the reason for that is because there is no 180 degrees that the camera is restricted to. It's filming from all types of angles, 360 all around, and pretty up close too. I hope I'm explaining this enough. Basically, the effect as the camera is going back and forth between all these people talking is that we feel very claustrophobic and we feel disoriented, and you just kind of feel like, wait, what is going on? That is on purpose, of course, because that's how Agnes is feeling. And I think it's very true that when you're in an uncomfortable or stressful social situation, you kind of lose sight of the bigger picture. You lose sight of the space around you, and you lock in on the perceived threat. So at some point in this whole thing of like, oh yeah, Decker loved Agnes, whatever, Agnes leaves the table. She says she has to go to the bathroom or something. Lydie is still at the table. This whole time, Lydie has been sitting next to Agnes. That we do know. They were in the shot together, which of course shows us that she has Lydie in her bubble with her, and they are a team, and they share the same perspective, quite literally, and we have the same perspective on them because they are effectively one person together in this situation. And so when Agnes excuses herself from the table and goes to the bathroom, Lydie does this incredible thing and makes a comment about the fish that they're eating. She says something like, there are bones in this fish. And Natasha, the host with the eyes, is like, what? And Lydie's like, yeah, there's bones in my fish. I almost choked. You should probably be more careful next time. You should debone your fish. And of course, you know, in normal world where everything is normal, that's like a slightly rude comment to make, criticizing the food at a dinner party. But Lydie is saying it in the most disrespectful way possible because she knows that that little passive-aggressive barb is exactly Natasha's language. She is speaking Natasha's language to Natasha to insult her. And it's kind of beautiful. It was a funny moment, but it also was like, I felt relief as an audience member, like, okay, Lydie has Agnes's back and these people are pathetic and Agnes is fine because she has Lydie. And paralleling that feeling of relief, the camera finally cuts wide so that we see the whole table, most of the room from pretty far away, and we finally see where everyone has been sitting. Does it matter that much where everyone has been sitting to make the scene make sense? No, this is not about logistically explaining to you what's going on. This is about the feeling that you get, almost like coming out of a low ceiling basement or something, where you're like, oh, I can breathe again. And we're meant to feel that relief. That's the relief that Agnes feels with Lydie always having her back. Lydie becomes immediately a very grounding force and someone who is super tethered to reality and normalcy amongst this group of people who are very culty and toxic, like way too into the power struggle of academia. Everything is hierarchy, everything is competition, and you need the approval of your academic superiors in order to be worth anything. And because Agnes is perceived to have that, she becomes a target and she's misunderstood. I think that the jealousy creates some like magical thinking about Agnes, that her, you know, time in college was so amazing and she had it easier and she was favored. Jealousy creates magical thinking. It creates delusion. If jealousy is a disease, Natasha is seriously terminally ill. Okay, so that's a great example of when you break a rule. When you understand a rule and what it does, you can break it thoughtfully to great effect. If you didn't know the 180-degree rule, you will now see it everywhere. You're welcome. After seeing a sort of sliver of the social and emotional aftermath of what school has done to Agnes, we go back and we do see some of school before. The Professor Decker was nice and handsome and friendly, and yes, did clearly favor Agnes before anything happened. And you can see that maybe Agnes has a crush on him, but there was a lot of subtlety in that dynamic. People always say, oh, like you have to think about the power dynamic in relationships. It's not just about they consented, they wanted to be a part of it. You have to think about what is the power dynamic around that. So when you're a kid in school, like a literal child, and when you're an adult in grad school, you see your teacher and your professor as being on a different plane of existence to you. Okay, especially if you're a nerd and sort of a teacher's pet like Agnes. Her work is always done on time, always done well. And while Lydie is literally screaming, tearing her hair out in the library, which was very real to me, Agnes is fine. She's working hard, sure, but it comes naturally to her, basically. And she clearly loves what she's studying. So this quote-unquote crush that she has on Decker, to me, reads like she thinks he's brilliant, she admires his work a lot, and she really wants him to like her work as a young student. Is he also maybe cute? Sure, that adds to the effect, but it's all fun and games to have a crush on your professor. But the second you feel that that professor is aware of the crush and or reciprocates it, it's just not fun anymore. It's not fun. It's not the point. It's not the same as having a crush on a friend and you're like debating whether or not you want to make a move. It's just admiration, and it's so innocent. And I think you can see Agnes's innocence in so many moments, but one of them that was particularly impactful, I think, is she's in office hours with Decker and he gifts her this first edition copy of a book from his personal library in his office. And you see such a reverence that she has for books and for literature, and she very sweetly asks, can I touch it, about the book? Like she's in awe of this book. Like she is so innocent and pure in a way. That's what I got from that. And even before anything happens with Decker, like her peers notice that maybe he's giving her a little bit of extra attention. Plus, it's like, has there ever been a small group class where a crush on the professor is not discussed? Like it just is part of the deal, especially if he's relatively young and relatively good looking. Like it's going to come up. So Lydie at some point asks Agnes, like, I think he's into you. And Agnes is like, oh, ew, like, no. And Lydia's like, well, would you hook up with him if he wanted to? And Agnes is like, no. And you can tell that she means it. Like, even though other people are seeing their dynamic and thinking like, oh, are you like into him? Do you want to like hook up with him? She's like, what? No. Because truly in her mind, it's not going that way. It is not romantic interest or sexual interest. I think a lot of people have a hard time distinguishing that, especially when there's a sexual assault, even though of course we know that like consent is situational. Consent has to be given constantly. You could be married to someone, have slept with them a million times, and still not give consent, right? So it doesn't matter in theory whether or not Agnes wanted to hook up with Decker, but in reality, it does matter because there are going to be plenty of people who say, well, she fed into it, she liked him, she flirted with him, etc. But to me, and I think this was Ava Victor's intention, I really saw that there was a type of crush there that is so schoolgirl and so nothing. And yeah, maybe she likes the attention. Yeah, maybe she likes being seen as the young and beautiful and brilliant student. Mostly brilliant. She really appreciates his praise of her work. She gets fixated on that. But yeah, everybody likes a little bit of attention, especially when it's from someone you admire. There is nothing manipulative in that. There is nothing about it where she's trying to gain an advantage in school at all. She doesn't need it, frankly. Unlike someone like Natasha, she has this like intense desperation for attention from Decker that is like almost played comical. It is played comical. Like in class, if Decker says something nice about Agnes's work, Natasha will be like, what about mine? Did you like mine? Did you read mine? Did you like my work? Did you read it? And he's kind of like, yeah, Natasha, it was good, you know? So at first I kind of struggled with this. I felt like she was such a caricature and she was so over the top. It was a little bit distracting. But I think there's two things behind this. One is that her desperation for his approval and attention shows us, the audience, how much power he has psychologically over these students. Even if externally Agnes is not fawning over him the same way that Natasha is, she is in that same universe, and whatever that influence that he has over them is, Agnes is subject to it too. So it's important context for us what kind of figure he was in that isolated New England college community. On the other hand, the whole story is really told from Agnes's point of view, to the point that things are occasionally distorted or obscured by how she saw them. And we'll get more into that later, but one of those things is that Natasha becomes cartoonish almost because when people have bullied you or wronged you or just been a menace, just been an absolute menace to you, you can remember them as almost cartoonish. Natasha, because she is so up Agnes's ass and because she pisses Agnes off so much, in Agnes's memories and from her point of view, she is this like absolutely ridiculous character. And so I think the actor for Natasha, Kelly McCormack Victor, is she related to Ava Victor? I don't know. But anyway, she's fantastic and she really gives you that unhinged energy. So that's kind of the vibe we have on Decker and the students before the assault. I'm still talking about it as before the assault because as I was watching the movie, I knew that that's what happened. And I think most, at least women watching, would know immediately that that's what happened. But at this point, we still have not been told that there was an assault. It's getting hot in here because I turned off my AC to film so there would be no background noise. If this sounds particularly good this episode, let me know because I'm suffering. I'm suffering for the sound quality right now. We get to the incident. Basically what happens is Decker is supposed to meet Agnes to discuss her work, and he actually doesn't show up at his office. He tells her to come to his house instead, like last minute, after she had already gone to the office. And he uses an excuse about his son or something, who he shares custody with his ex-wife. And he's mentioned him to Agnes before, so he's kind of built up some plausible credibility on this, that this is a legitimate excuse. And you can see Agnes kind of hesitate because, I mean, I know when I was in college, if they asked me to office hours in private somewhere that was not their office in a school building, I would never go. Unless it was a group dinner at a professor's house. And you can see her hesitate. And I think that's going through her head of like, is that sus? And she's probably thinking, well, people have been saying that maybe he has a crush on me. He doesn't mean. No, I'm sure he doesn't mean. All of that, I see that in her eyes when she gets this message from him. But she goes ultimately. Like, he has been nothing but respectful and polite and almost completely professional with her. I say almost completely because his favoritism is unprofessional, but it's really hard to see that when you're the subject of the favoritism because it feels good. And you want to believe that you deserve it. Ultimately, she walks to his house because he's not far from the school building that she parked at. So she doesn't have her car with her. She walks up to this house, and we have this shot, this wide shot from across the street of the house. And it's like a typical old New England little home. It looked like New Haven, Connecticut to me. It looked like upstate New York. I mean, it was perfect. Again, it's winter. The trees are dead. You don't have a good feeling. The lights are on in the house, but it's light out as well. It looks, for the most part, fine. You know, you're a little bit nervous, but fine. When Agnes walks up to the door and goes inside, the door closes and we don't follow her in. We don't cut. We stay wide across the street watching the house. So at this point, my heart is like in my throat with dread because I know what is happening, right? I don't know exactly what's happening, but I feel like I know what's happening behind that door and I can't help her. We're lingering outside the house with truly what I can only describe as dread. And then we see the sky get a little bit darker. We don't know what time it was originally, but maybe like early afternoon. We see the sky get a little bit darker. The sun starts setting. Cut. No noise, no movement. She's still presumably in the house. And then it cuts dark and the lights are still on in the house and she's still in there. The feeling that I had watching this was like sickening. And I think it was a really powerful choice not to show the assault for so many reasons. First of all, similar to Anna Kendrick's Woman of the Hour, I think it shows a sort of empathy and respect for survivors of sexual violence to not recreate viscerally an attack. And I know people have different opinions on this, but personally, I hate seeing rape scenes in movies or TV shows. I stopped watching Game of Thrones at some point because it just started to feel like gratuitous. It started to feel like, okay, HBO, like we get it, you're allowed, but just because you can do something doesn't mean you should, you know? And I definitely feel that way about like American Psycho, the way that people glorify American Psycho, and they're like, well, obviously he's a bad guy. And it's like, yeah, but why do you love watching him kill women so bad? You know, I have a real problem with film claiming to criticize or provide commentary on a harmful dynamic when it's actually just mirroring and repackaging and glorifying and perpetuating it. You see that all the time with like sort of Lolita stories as well. So there's that aspect of kind of being spared the gory details. But there's also, more importantly, in my opinion, the storytelling that what matters about the incident is not the facts exactly as they happened. It's what Agnes has remembered from it. It's what Agnes experienced, and we learn that later. And I think it's very true, sort of in your brain, when something really traumatic happens, it can feel a little bit like, it can feel like a scary haunted house that you don't want to go into, you don't want to go back into, you don't want to open that door, and you don't want to have to re-experience those traumatic events. And so I felt like in that the home is where you are supposed to be totally safe. You're supposed to be your truest self. She took the chance to trust this man. He knew she really admired him, and she entered his home, and all of that was perverted, was flipped on its head. She could not feel safe. She could not trust her instincts. She could not be herself. And that's a really, really painful experience, not just for the fact of the harm done in the moment, but it is incredibly destabilizing to yourself, to your home in your own brain forever. And so I don't think it's a coincidence that we're focusing on the house in this shot, or that we focus on exteriors and interior shots of houses throughout this movie. The house also represents the domestic sphere and the woman's world, if you will. That was in air quotes. While film often luxuriates in grand adventures and sort of over-the-top public violence, like a Western, think a classic Hollywood Western, think a Tarantino, the human reality is that a lot of the harm and the violence committed against women in the world is in the home, All right. So finally, after it's dark out and the lights are still on in the house, and we've even seen a couple of pedestrians meander by with their dog, totally oblivious to what's going on in private, suddenly the door bursts open and Agnes kind of stumbles out, sits on the stoop and like quickly shoves her boots on and walks away. And you see Decker lingering behind the open doorway. You can't see his face or anything, but he's kind of standing in like a, oh, what happened sort of way. You can see that Agnes is leaving in distress and confusion just by the way she walks. She goes home to the apartment that she shares with Lydie, since they're both still students at the time, and she immediately tells Lydie what she understands of what happened. And we get this scene of Agnes in the bathtub and Lydie sitting on the floor with her, next to her in the bathroom, trying to piece together what Agnes has just experienced. Mostly I want to talk about Lydie's response in this situation, but I also want to say, again, in terms of symbolism, a bath represents rebirth. So if the house is symbolic of yourself, your brain, your mind, I think the bath inside the house is kind of a womb. I understand that that might sound like a stretch to some people, but it's just my interpretation. If you have a different interpretation, you are welcome to. If you saw something different, or if you think that it meant something different, like, let me know. But don't come to me saying it didn't mean anything, you're overthinking it. Have some respect for Victor, have some respect for the people who made this movie, and give them the credit that choices were made for reasons. You can't say that about every movie. You can't say that about a lot of the things that happened in F1. Lord knows if you listen to my F1 episode. You can't say that about some of the things in Superman. Lingering on a bath scene right after the most important incident in the movie is not random. And we get more bath scenes later in the movie as well, which I'll get to. The way that Agnes, her eyes look so dead and dissociating in this bath, like, really broke my heart, as did her confusion. She is most of all really confused about what has just happened, and she's right to be. And I think it's interesting that her whole career, her whole life is words, is literature, is English. But from this moment on in the movie, when she talks about the incident, I keep calling it the incident because that's kind of how she talks about it in the movie. I'm not trying to like obscure or diminish that it was sexual assault, but I think it's interesting that she cannot find the right words to talk about this. Sorry, the camera died, but I'm back. So I think I was talking about how even though Agnes, her whole life's work and passion and career is English and literature, she cannot even really say full coherent sentences when trying to describe the attack. I also think that this speaks to how difficult it is to say that you've been raped or accept that it happened to you, because as women, our whole lives, from, in my opinion, far too young of an age, we are told how to avoid being raped, essentially, and that it's probably going to happen to us or our best friend at some point in our lives. Now, I'm not saying that like women should be naive and not know that it's a reality, but I think this amplifies the fear of facing what has happened, because not only has it caused you pain and suffering, but now it will also change the way the world sees you and the way that everyone you know sees you. And that's not an optimistic prospect. Also, Agnes saying how when she left, she looked at Decker and it almost looked like he was scared. I think that's so spot on to many situations where you are the victim of abuse of some kind, but part of what confuses you about that is that it seems like the perpetrator feels like a victim themselves or is suffering in some way. And especially if you are an empathetic person, which I think Agnes is, it confuses your ability to understand their actions. It's not that hard to believe that someone who is otherwise a pretty upstanding citizen can do horrible things to women in private. Logically, Agnes might know that, and maybe she would have told that to a friend going through the same thing, but in the moment, the intensity of the feeling, the intensity of the pain and confusion is really valid. I could go on forever about Agnes's response, but I also really want to get into how Lydie is a perfect friend in this situation. I think a lot of times when we see someone, even if there's someone close to us going through something horrible, there's an instinct to back away from the pain. There's an instinct to say, they need space to process this. I don't want to get involved and maybe say something unhelpful. These are all things that we feel and that we tell ourselves, and I think that's completely human. But what separates a friend from a best friend or from a really amazing friend is that Lydie does not just comfort Agnes. She actually doesn't comfort Agnes really explicitly at almost any point in this movie. The friendship that she offers is companionship in the pain. She does not cower or shy away from the raw pain that Agnes is feeling in the moment. You have to feel the hurt and devastation as a friend in that situation. Friend is not a strong enough word. I feel like a companion in pain. You have to feel it. And sometimes all a person needs is to feel that they're not alone. Yeah. Unless you're the person who hurt someone, I think people very rarely need space. I think that's something that we tell ourselves to avoid awkward situations and avoid pain. But most people don't need space when they're going through a horrible life experience. And I think, obviously, in a lot of ways, sorry, baby, in this movie, Agnes is the baby for most of the movie. And she is a baby, not in a derogatory way, oh, you're a baby or a crybaby, but she is as vulnerable and innocent and delicate as a baby mentally and emotionally in the aftermath of the rape. The way that Lydie handles her with such care and love is just really beautiful to see. Oh my God, it makes me so emotional. I can't say everything I want to say. I would sit here for hours and hours. Okay. One thing that Agnes said that really hit me at some point is when she says, I don't even want him to die, in regards to Decker. I don't remember when this was. I wrote it down while I was watching the movie. It's easier to point blank period despise someone who has harmed you than it is to feel ambiguous towards someone who has harmed you. She sees all these other parts of him that have nothing to do with how he hurt her, and she cannot reconcile that whole human with a life and a child with the monster in her story. Agnes grappling with what justice means, what restoration in the wake of the trauma means, is one of the harder parts of this movie because there is no answer. So many people failed Agnes. She goes to the doctor the next day and he's an old man and he's incredibly cold and clinical. Get the patient in, do the thing you're supposed to do, get the patient out. Oh yeah, and maybe ask if they want to kill themselves. And then we see in the school administration how women in legal and HR protect a male abuser. The role of those two women who go and talk to Agnes is basically to get her to drop it. And it's always, it's always an investigation, not an action. It's always the university, the institution, and the fine print and the rules. The rules didn't matter to Decker. Didn't he break the rules? It's always, you have the option of going to the police. And this is so infuriating because it seems like people are okay with talking about it in a broad social sense, like what are the factors and forces that contribute. But it's really much harder to deal with in specific. It's ambiguous and messy by nature. Suddenly, when it happens to you and you go, okay, well, I've existed in this world where everyone's talking about how this is so horrible and how we should protect victims, suddenly it's a you problem. Suddenly now this is like a problem very specific to you that you've experienced and you need to figure out how to deal with on your own. Yeah, I think this is extremely true. There's so many shots that I wrote down that I wanted to talk about, but one of them I have to talk about is when Agnes is sort of beginning to turn a new page and heal. And one of the things she does is puts up her sheets of her thesis as basically a makeshift curtain or shades on her window. None of her windows have coverings on them. Throughout the movie, you see her being spooked by little noises here and there and just generally feeling unsafe in her home. The attack didn't happen in her home, right? It happened at his home. But he took away her sense of trust and safety. Her body no longer understands what space is safe versus where she needs to be in survival mode. So when she puts her thesis up, tapes it up on the window, I want to hear what other people thought of this moment or what it meant to you. To me, I think it was her kind of literally shielding herself from the world and from fear of the unknown with something that she can firmly lean on, which is her pride in her work. She knows her work is good. And she's not going to let Decker take that away from her because she cared so much for his validation before. And now she can't trust his validation because she doesn't trust him. It wasn't just the sexual assault in its isolated incident. It's a catastrophe mentally. Her degree and her success as a student was really central to her self-image and self-worth, and we see that in the earlier scenes. It's pretty much her whole life. It's all of these people's whole lives. I can't stress enough how much this town conveyed that feeling of being in like fall semester, finals coming up. Even just saying it, I get like clammy hands. They are really isolated in this world. It doesn't matter if looking from the outside you could say, what? You know, if things ever get that bad, you can always drop out. You can move to Bali. You can come back. You can shave your head. You don't feel that kind of ability to reinvent yourself in those environments. You feel that this is literally everything. And as she finishes putting up the sheets of paper, a piano piece slowly kind of crescendos. Oh, it was so beautiful. It was so perfect and moving. Honestly, I know this is probably crazy to say because, well, okay. It reminded me of Bella's Lullaby from Twilight. And I'm saying this is crazy because Bella's Lullaby was probably referencing so many other things, you know what I mean? But I don't know what those things are because I'm not super knowledgeable about composers and scores. Anyway, I've been recording, by the way, for like 2 hours at this point. So I must have done a lot of editing. Oh, another thing about the music is that in the moments of silence where all we heard was maybe Agnes walking around on the creaking floorboards or the wind or paper shuffling, the silence had a huge presence as well. And it was kind of like, I would compare it to in a painting when the negative space is really a central focus or really does something important. It was like that. It was like the positive and the negative space, the music and the silence. And like when Lydie leaves from her visit, the house is so silent and it really hits you. Like the emptiness, you know, when people say like the silence is so loud, the silence was so loud. I felt so aware of it, like it had this presence in its absence. All right, I want to talk about the kitten and then I want to talk about the panic attack and then the baby. Kitten, panic attack, and baby is what we have left on the docket. So at some point, Agnes is walking down the street and she sees a stray kitten and she immediately like goes to it and it comes to her and like jumps into her arms or something and she goes, okay, like I guess I love you now. It was so heartwarming and sweet and funny. She has been betrayed by humans. She doesn't feel safe with humans. She sees this kitten on the street. The kitten's alone and innocent just like she was, but a cat also is tough. Street cats are tough. Street cats are famously survivors, land on their feet, have 9 lives. And so the kitten, I think, kind of perfectly represents this duality of being vulnerable and alone, but also having pride and dignity and strength. And I think Agnes is really drawn to that because she wants to be more like that. Also, hiding the cat like in her jacket to go into the store, so relatable. I do that with this one, with Suki all the time. She keeps me so grounded in the present moment and therefore more able to connect with other humans. We see Agnes smile again for the first time with the cat. We see the cat kind of filling in some of the empty space and the silence in the house. And we also have this moment where the cat has brought in a mouse to Agnes's bed. I had a cat as a child that used to do that, like bring in dead birds under the radiator. But yeah, in her bed is diabolical. So Agnes basically like gets up a giant book and she's freaking out and she's like, I forget the name of the cat, but she's like, why'd you do this? Are you kidding me? What the hell? Freaking out. But then she kills the mouse. Did I love seeing a mouse get squished to death? No, but it was a necessary sacrifice for Agnes. Agnes was empowered by that moment because she was effectively defending her home and her literal bed and herself from this little rodent. In that moment, Decker is the little mouse, the intruder, the unwelcome, nasty little rodent who has found his way into her most intimate space. And Agnes becomes like a cat. It's almost like when you are in a house with other people and you see a spider, you're more likely to kind of be like, guys, there's a spider, and see if anyone else steps up. When you live alone and you see a spider or a cockroach, you have to kill it. That's your job. No one else is there. But the way that she was so immediately appalled, how dare you, and killed the mouse, and then suddenly felt safe again, it was really empowering for her to sort of act that out. In her trauma, her survival response was, I think, basically fawn and freeze and eventually flight. You know how they say fight or flight, but really it's fight, flight, freeze, fawn. And I'm placing 0 value on any of those responses. It's completely out of your control what your brain does. And then with the mouse, her response is fight, and she wins the fight. She must have gone over the incident so many times in her mind, and she must have thought, what if I had done this differently? What if I had done that differently? I think it's just human to think those things. And so there's something so satisfying about this visceral moment of protecting herself from the mouse. Right after that moment is when she marches off to her neighbor's house, Gavin, and is like, do you want to have sex with me? I don't really want to get fully into Gavin because I didn't totally get him, but that's all just to say that killing the mouse was a pivotal moment for her. Okay, now we have to talk about the panic attack / sandwich scene. One of my favorite scenes in the movie, if not my favorite. I mean, it's hard to say it's my favorite because something between Lydie and Agnes has to be my favorite, but maybe besides that, my favorite. So Agnes is talking to Natasha in her office, and at this point we're in the present day, she's a professor, after the attack and after Decker has left town. And Natasha says something that sends Agnes spiraling into a panic attack. She says that she slept with Decker consensually, but also in the hopes that he would pay more attention to her academically, and he literally didn't. Understandably, for so many reasons, this sends Agnes into a panic. She leaves and she's driving her car, but is clearly kind of having trouble breathing. And so she pulls into a parking lot off the road, and she's taking deep breaths in her car, kind of crying, kind of freaking out. And, this guy, this very very Northeastern New England guy is like, hey, you can't stop there, whatever. And then he sees that she's having a panic attack very visibly, and he immediately kind of backs off of that and is like, oh shit, oh no, oh, my son gets these breathing attacks, here, I'll help you. And he immediately shifts into this very matter of fact, here's how we're going to get you out of this. He guides her through breathing exercises. He breathes with her. And that's another instance where we get the demonstration of how you be there for someone. So just like Lydie went through it essentially with Agnes, this stranger in this parking lot is doing the breathing exercises with her. Agnes is able to sort of regulate and come back to stable. And this guy, who says his name is Pete, he's played by John Carroll Lynch. This guy says, do you want a sandwich? He runs a sandwich shop. Oh my gosh, this scene made me cry. A sandwich can do so much for a person. Feeding someone is such an act of love. That's the Lebanese in me of I think that feeding people is a solution to so many problems, or at least it opens the door to community, which is what happens. They sit on these, I don't know what those things are called, that in front of the parking spot, like a curb. And he's talking about, I wanted to get chairs out here, but there's that place across the way and they didn't let me get chairs. And it's just such a typical, stranger conversation with some dude who owns a business that I love. I can't remember the details of what they talk about. I only saw this one time in theaters a week ago. It's not on streaming or anything, but I don't think they talk about anything in detail. Mostly it's a moment where a stranger saw her in distress, acute distress, and instead of kind of turning around and being like, oh, none of my business, sorry lady, hope you feel better, he, without any hesitation, takes it upon himself to be part of that moment and to help her through it. Something really nice about this too is it was such an overwhelmingly positive moment, and you see how the kindness of one person, not that it makes up for all of the horrible responses that she's gotten, but he's able to do so much for her in that moment by giving so little of himself because he genuinely just cares. I'm still figuring out how to know instinctively when to avoid a stranger and when to engage. It's hard, especially as a woman, because sometimes you judge wrong and then you regret being open. But just like having a pet around can just be this very simple tether to reality. Conversations with strangers who are kind and good tethers you to reality and also helps you hold on to a general sense that the world is good and that people are good, which is really hard to hold on to and is unclear whether or not that's true. But feeling that it's true is pretty important to your well-being as a person who has to exist in the world with other people. And of course, I don't think it's random that this is a man who comforts her in this moment, because Decker also destroyed her sense of trusting a male mentor figure, and having this random stranger older man truly be nothing but good in this moment, I think is really healing for her. All right. Last thing that I want to talk about is the closing scene of this movie where Agnes is watching Lydie's new fresh baby. So this whole movie, like I said, Agnes is kind of symbolically a baby. She's vulnerable. She is absorbing everything around her. So the symbolism of a baby and of birth and rebirth is super important throughout this movie. Then we finally have this moment where Agnes is kind of an asshole about the baby at first, very much giving the energy of like finding out you have a younger sibling and being like, what? But I'm the baby in town. Because Agnes is Lydie's baby. But she has to reckon with this moment where I have to kind of take care of myself for the most part now. And I also have to be there for my friend too. And I have to step up. Lydie has done everything for me, and now she's happy with her partner. They don't really like Agnes that much because Agnes is kind of an asshole about the baby and kind of like, wait guys, leave the baby, let's have fun. But she has a moment where she realizes what she's doing, and she goes, no, I'll watch the baby. Lydie and her partner are like, okay, we'll go. They're only going to be gone for like an hour or something. Go on a hike or whatever. Lydie's partner, they're kind of like, don't drop it or whatever. Clearly, Agnes is not a naturally maternal person, whatever that means. So she picks up this baby and she's kind of like, what am I supposed to do with this baby? She walks out to the porch and she's just looking at it. And this moment where she is in kind of in awe of the baby, of the newness of it, and the fact that this is now a person who will go through life, is just so mind-blowing to Agnes. And she gives this monologue at the end of the movie that gives us our title, Sorry Baby. I was trying so hard not to bawl my eyes out. You have to watch this scene. But basically stumbles through saying, I'll be there for you. Even if terrible things happen to you, I'll be there for you. And I'm sorry that terrible things happen. I can't stop terrible things from happening to you, but you'll be okay when they do, because your parents and I love you, and I'll be there for you. We're coming full circle. Agnes, just like she saw the kitten and recognized its innocence, she sees the baby and she sees how innocent it is and how vulnerable, and she is sad that it will grow up to experience the kind of profound suffering and pain that Agnes has experienced recently. And she knows that there is no preventing that. Life is full of challenges and full of suffering, and some people are luckier than others, but everybody goes through something horrible at some point in their life. And she's trying to reckon with that. You know, like, we know that she's been kind of passively suicidal as well, and she's reckoning with, like, what is the point, you know? And I think the conclusion that she comes to is because there is so much love, the love that she and Lydie share, the love she's eventually able to achieve for herself. And I think similar to how she kills the mouse and feels a sense of she's capable of protecting herself, when you see a baby, when you are responsible for a child, even temporarily, it changes the way that you operate in the world, and it changes the way that you see the world, and it makes you feel more capable. And Agnes does not have that responsibility just yet. She's more like a godmother or an aunt. And when Agnes literally says, sorry, baby, I'm sorry, baby, that you will have to experience pain, I think she's also apologizing to herself and acknowledging that it's not right what she went through. Not that she ever thought it was right, but just allowing herself a moment of compassion for herself. And in a lot of ways, I think that allows you to just release and move on. Acknowledge that something was horrible and unfair, and there is no reason why it happened. There is no purpose. It just was bad. And then you can move on. Agnes goes through her final moment of transformation in this scene, in this beautiful monologue, where she looks at the baby and she sees both her past self and this future life that is totally outside of her, but that she will be a part of. Decker doesn't matter. It's not about her coming to a final judgment on his character, because that's not her problem. He's not her problem. It's about her coming to a final judgment on her experience and her story. That is a truth that you can hold on to much more firmly than anything to do with he is a bad person, he isn't a bad person, he's going to hell, he's a good father, he's not. The question of who he is after what he's done? It's an impossible question, and it's not fair for her to have to answer it. But she can answer the question of who she is and who she wants to be, and she is finally doing that. There is still melancholy. There is still sadness, but it's just part of the texture of life. Being able to come to a place of humor and happiness and love and connection and caring for other people. I don't want to say that's what makes life worth living, but this is the shit that I live for with the people I die for, you know? Sorry if this was not as funny or energetic as the previous 2 movies I did. I'm going to do K-pop Demon Hunters next, so that will be more upbeat. But yeah, I want to talk about good film, what makes it good, and why I liked it, as much as I want to have fun and giggle. I loved this movie, and I wish only good things for it in award season. I wish only good things for the stars, especially for Ava Victor, star and director. What a freaking debut. I mean, seriously, kind of insane. So, yeah, thank you, A24. I've been fed. If you listen to the end, get a life. Just kidding. Love you. Bye.